Hello, this is Frank Valente and welcome back to part 3 in the series of how to buy a property. So today I'm going to talk about making the offer, and I could talk for a long time on this. When you do make that first offer as a buyer, you should have lots of questions about this, but we'll go through this kind of the high points. So whenever we make an offer, it's a contract. In order for a contract to be legal, it has to be in writing and there has to be money exchanged. So we could write the contract on the back of an envelope. We don't, but if we did that and there was money exchanged, that would be a valid contract. But in California, 95% of the time, I'm going to use the residential purchase agreement, which is a 10-page document with fine print, and that's designed to protect the buyer and the seller in the process. As far as actually making your deposit, which we call the earnest money deposit, you're going to have 3 days to get that in there. Now, you make the initial offer in writing. It can be subject to the seller countering it, giving counters or addendums. I like to describe these as kind of change orders, but until all sides agree to all the counters, again, all sides have to agree to all terms, has to be in writing, deposit accepted, then we have a valid contract, and now we're in escrow. So once we're in escrow, there's lots of things in the contract we call contingencies that actually protect the buyer primarily, but also the seller. So the first one I always talk about is the disclosures and reports. So the seller has 7 days typically, and these dates I'm going to mention are also negotiable, but typically it's going to be 7 days to give you his disclosures, his information on the property, and any reports that he's already done on the property. So you have 7 days to review those as the buyers. You're going to do a home inspection at least, maybe a roof inspection, maybe a sewer inspection, maybe a pool inspection, but we're going to ask for 17 days to do all our inspections. You're going to have 17 days to get your appraisal done, and then 21 days to get your loan finalized. So even though you've already been pre-approved, pre-qualified for an amount, the lender's gonna double check, make sure he can do the loan. And so that's another contingency, that a final loan approval. You may, as a buyer, have a house to sell. That's what we call, a lot of times we call that a contingent offer, but that may be where you have a house to sell before you could purchase, and we'll write that into the contract. That's for the sale of a property. Even the seller could put in there that he needs to find a replacement property, and that's another contingency that we may have in there. So these are the typical contingencies that could be in the offer. They all don't have to be there, but the important thing to remember is they must be removed in writing per the contract. So for example, let's say you're doing your inspections and you're at day 17, until you actually remove that contingency in writing, you still have that contingency in play. So you got to remove all these to really, be all in. So you got to do it in writing. I like to think of these as kind of your get out of jail free cards. It allows the buyer and the seller to legally be able to break or terminate that contract without closing. Now, when you're writing an offer, I don't want you to make a frivolous offer saying, okay, I know I can get out of it, because once we start escrow, you're going to tie up some earnest money deposit, which you get back if the contract doesn't go through. But as a minimum, you're going to be paying for the appraisal. You're going to be paying for a home inspection. So typically, you could lose, between those two inspections, about $1,000. So again, there's a lot of, legal terms that go into this contract. The first time you write one, you should have lots of questions, and I'm always available to answer lots of questions about this. If you got any questions on contracts, please feel free to text or email or anything on real estate, and have a great day. Bye-bye.